Hello, my name's Jim Leach, and today I'm going to give a short talk about a choir tour that my school made to Portugal and Spain in June of 2024. Before I do that, it's probably important to know a little bit about this school. And the school, it was founded in 1964, and from 1964 until 1989, it was known as St. George's College, and it's located in an area of Toronto known as the Annex. The cross streets are close to Bathurst and Bloor. It's actually northeast of that crossroads in Toronto. In 1989, the title was changed when it was given a royal charter, and from 1989 to the present, it's being known as Royal St. George's College. It's a school of about 500 boys from grades 3 to grade 12. It was founded not as a choir school, but with a school where the choir was an important aspect of its curriculum, and that would provide singers for St. James Cathedral in Toronto, but also to other prominent churches in the Toronto area that had boys' choirs, such as St. Thomas on Huron Street, St. Simon's in the East End near Rosedale, and St. Clement's in North Toronto. It wasn't the first school on this location, however. In the late 1800s, there was another choir school there, and it was part of what was to be St. Albans Cathedral, where the cornerstone for that was laid in 1888. For a number of reasons, mostly having to do with finances, but also World War I and the Depression, the cathedral was never built. And eventually, in the 1930s, the cathedral was moved to St. James on King Street in Toronto. But the building still remains, and in 1964, the school started to use this as its to educate boys and also to train them in Anglican music tradition. There are a number of slides here. The first is a drawing of St. Albans Cathedral as it was envisaged in 1888. We have an overhead schematic drawing of what the cathedral would have looked like had it been finished. There's an outdoor view of the finished part of the cathedral, which forms the chapel of Royal St. George's College, and that view is from St. Albans Park. This park at one time was part of the church property, but at some time it was given to the city of Toronto. There are two views here inside the chapel, one looking from the back. There are weekly services that we have, a full school evensong on Thursday afternoons, a senior school service on Tuesday mornings, and every other Friday, a shortened service for the junior school students and staff. The picture on the right shows the choir and the chancel. The dog that you've seen in a number of photographs here is my bearded collie, Henry, and I'm the chaplain at Royal St. George College. Henry comes into school with me every day. So there we are in a park in Toronto in the springtime, Henry with me. As the chaplain, I conduct the services there and work with the boys. These were two boys who were doing a project on energy usage in the chapel, and they were interviewing me about things like heating and lighting. This is a photograph of an evensong that in 2024 coincided exactly with Halloween. So you can see the boys and their teachers in their Halloween costumes for evensong. One of the activities that I run at the school is the training and employment of a servers guild, which is very popular at the school. Currently, there are about 16 members of the servers guild. And this is a group of the servers who were at St. James Cathedral in December 20th, 2023, for the annual carol service with Bishop Kevin Robertson and the interim dean, Peter Wall, there at the end of the service. I also conduct confirmation classes, and this is a group of the boys who were confirmed at St. James in April of 2023. In addition to my liturgical duties, I teach classes. This year I teach grade 12 world history and grade 12 Canadian and international law. This is the world history class from 2023 when we were visiting Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. And this is from 2022, again, a history class after we played a lacrosse game when we visited Ste. Marie among the Hurons near Midland, Ontario. Outside of the classroom, I coach the school's senior varsity hockey team in the winter term, and in the spring term, I coach under 12 softball with boys from the junior school. The choir at the school is a popular and well-established tradition. So of the 500 boys at the school, almost 20% of them sing in one choir or another. And this is a photograph of the Portugal choir tour before we went to Portugal in June of 2024. So let's get to the heart of this discussion. There's a common misconception that when people ask, "How are you?" they may want to know. I think it's the same with, "How was your flight?" In a travel like this, opening with flight is kind of unavoidable, so I hope you'll indulge me a bit. Notwithstanding a few hours delay, the flight was fine. While a man in a reflective work vest addressed problems with the in-flight entertainment system, and you don't have to be a highly paid IT professional to know that he probably turned it on and off again a few times before it would work. But gripes aside about the flight were instantly forgotten when we were greeted in Lisbon by our guide from last year's tour, a man named Danny. That's not Danny, that's one of the boys from the choir with me and with Doug Jameson, the choir master, when we had a walk in Lisbon our first day. So Danny met us at the airport. He's a very genial guy with a dry wit and a husky voice. You'd almost say he was right out of Spanish Central Casting. He was doubly welcome this year, helping one chorister who had left a backpack near the baggage carousel. A security guard had to be summoned to squire the student back into the arrivals area where the bag was instantly located. Then the various Portuguese authorities had to be convinced that the bag actually belonged to the student and that it didn't contain any illicit drugs or explosives. After a vintage Soviet style series of conflicting referrals to this desk, no, that desk, back to the first desk, Danny saved the day by appealing to a police officer who cut through the nonsense and put balls on things. He helped solve this situation. To be fair, while these were small problems, they were a little unsettling on the first day, and the real story we'll get to is that we were there in Lisbon, a place that I had never visited before. The weather for our trip was picture perfect, with full sun in azure skies, tempered by a refreshing ocean breeze. I've read that the best practice is to beat jet lag is by staying up and moving until local bedtime. So we drove straight to the city center to disperse for a late lunch. For the table of the chaperones, this meant a plate of 4 marvelous grilled sardines, a Portuguese signature dish, particularly at this time of the year in June. Then we went on a gentle walking tour back to the bus and then up to our hotel, where we checked out our rooms, freshened up before a quiet buffet in the hotel dining room, and then had a welcome early night. We got off to an early start on our first real day in Lisbon, heading to the oldest section of the city known as the Alfama. This is the only district that survived a massive earthquake in the 18th century, so it retains the region's Moorish influence, with a maze-like web of much narrower streets. Lisbon is known as a city of hills, and one of the main ones is in Alfama. So we began our visit by climbing straight to the top, navigating around vintage trolley cars and the relics of last night's street festivities. June is a month of significant saints' days, and many neighborhoods are close to vehicles and they throw street parties. In Alfalma, among the zigzagging streets and their web of switchbacks, it seemed at every corner and landing there was either an outdoor grill set up, a hole in the wall bar, or a postage stamp sized stage for live music. For lunch, we bussed the company to something of the opposite in the city, an entirely new neighborhood crafted on previously industrial land from 1998 World's Fair. Where Alfalma was close to the point of claustrophobia, the plazas in the Park of the Nations were wide open on a scale that could trigger agoraphobia. Many of us spent time in the oceanarium, an aquarium that claims to be the third largest in the world. Back on the bus, we entered the city center to the Basilica dos Martires, our first concert venue. As a performer, you couldn't ask for a better reception. Our host hit all the marks, a welcome as we arrived, immediate access to the instrument, the organ, for our two organists, the current and former RSBC organ scholars, a safe place to stow our gear, an opportunity for a fulsome rehearsal, and then a discreet place to climb into concert dress, all in a beautiful, historic setting with an acoustic generous enough to smooth out any rough edges and first night jitters. If you'll indulge in some tales of sausage making, one of the challenges in any church is the distance between the organ console and the spot from which the choir performs. The farther away we are from each other, the longer it takes sound to get from one performer to the other. And this goes badly. It's nearly impossible for us to be in sync. Maybe you remember trying to get people together to sing happy birthday during COVID on a Zoom call. It can be a bit like that. In this church, the organ couldn't have been farther away without leaving the building, with the choir arrayed facing the audience from the east end near the altar and the organ opposite on West Wall, in a loft about 3 stories up, and with the organist back the room. So there was every reason to expect a complete shambles in any accompanied pieces. I'd call it a miracle, but that's not fair because what happened was the result of skill and sensitive ensemble playing, with the organists figuring out just how many seconds ahead of time to play, either way. In practice, things worked out like a charm. You never know, we were, in a sense, literally in different time zones. After that, dinner was a wonderful Portuguese-style seafood stew for most of us, drawing to a close our first proper day in Portugal. On the third day, we were charged with bringing all of our kit for the entire day, including an evening performance with no stops back at the hotel. That can be a daunting prospect for 37 teenage boys and their chaperones. The days can feel long that way, and at the risk of a spoiler, the end of the day was a bit daunting. But things began well with a visit to Sintra, a historic mountain summer retreat for the Spanish royal family, now a busy museum, led by our local guide Vasco, who spoke to us over tiny radio receivers called whispers. We shuffled through, marveling at the contrasting influence of the Christian, then the Moorish, then again Christian stewards of the palace over the history of the building's construction. Then, off to our third stop of the day, a district of Lisbon called Belém, which in English would be Bethlehem. This spot, by the mouth of Lisbon's main river, is marked by several grassy tree-lined parks where we saw locals walking and biking, and also an ornate 16th century stone tower, part of the defensive infrastructure of the day. At this point, the Portuguese weather, began to turn unseasonable for us, clouding over and offering heaps of rain as we boarded the bus for our fourth stop, the Discoveries Monument. An impressive plaza is a strike in an impressive plaza is a striking monument to the Portuguese history of exploration. Thrust upward, much like a sail, and the base is lined with massive figures of the explorers and navigators who made that era happen. A pedestrian tunnel took us under a multi-lane riverside road to the Iglesia Santa Maria de Belém, just in time for a 6 o'clock rehearsal and a 7 p.m. show, which they call a mass participation, as we joined in the service and performed several of the elements. But at the stroke of 8, we began the service, taking part in an elegant mass held in memory of parishioners of the church who had recently died. Ultimately, we shared the musical chores, handing off back and forth with a duo consisting of a very gracious guitarist and a soprano with a voice picture perfect for the Portuguese musical style, fado. At the end of the service, family members approached Mr. Jameson and Mr. Beatty, the headmaster, to assure us, while they had no idea any of this would happen, their mother would have been touched and thrilled to have our contribution to the service. In short, despite adversity, we hit our mark and did very well. We peeled off our concert dress, walked to a nearby restaurant for a company dinner, and then by bus to the hotel at the end of the day. Our fourth day was a travel day. We left Lisbon, Portugal to return to Spain and Seville, where he had been in June 2023. Because the trip is a 4-hour drive, we broke it up with a stop for lunch at the town of Évora, a UNESCO World Heritage City dating back to Roman times. Key attractions included the substantial remains of a Roman temple, which was very impressive, and a chapel of skulls and bones, which was not, our guide Danny, came to the conclusion about the bones, and for the first time in his 2 tours, he apologized for having overhyped a destination. He is still batting close to 1,000, so we'll brook no complaints. And after fortifying ourselves, we set off again for Seville. At some point along the way, it was fun to notice the time that our phones jumped forward by an hour, the sign that we had crossed over into Spain, where, according to our Spanish guide, they like to think they're ahead of Portugal in this and many other ways. Just outside of Seville, we stopped at a roadside gas station for bathrooms and to allow our driver a legally mandated break, which they imposed for safety's sake so he's not driving for too long at a stretch. The soccer ball resurfaced on a patch of dirt nearby, and everyone found the convenience store. As is often the case, these places seem nearly indistinguishable from their analogues in Canada. Still, with one exception, one standard aspect that lets you know you're somewhere else entirely. Today it was this. Alongside the very familiar cans of Monster iced tea and bags of Doritos, there was a display of complete 50-kilogram legs of cured Iberian ham hanging in the middle of the shop, available for purchase. While you see that every day in Canada, you do see it in the Iberian Peninsula. In the end, we arrived and sat down at the Hotel Don Paco in Seville, where we had some time to freshen up before dinner, which was very easy to do at the rooftop pool and patio, and with a buffet dinner in us, we retired for the night. Our choir master, Mr. Jameson, told the assembled group that the Hotel Don Paco was the finest hotel in Seville in 1956. One of the things that happened now is that we were seeing signs of a tour plague, which is of some concern when you're skiing. Patient zero came off the plane last Saturday in Lisbon, already with symptoms of a cold, which had been slow to get rid to for him to leave him. On this day, two more boys stayed at the hotel to rest, and they joined us for dinner after the performance. The authorities, Mr. Jameson and Mr. Beattie, had to monitor the situation closely. On the fifth day, we were joined by Carmen, a guide specifically for sites in Seville. She walked us through the town to the Monument District. We began at the Real Alcazar, a royal palace of long standing, which is the location for some scenes in the fifth season of Game of Thrones. Like much of what we have seen throughout the trip, the site was a visual illustration of the interweaving of Moorish or Islamic influences with Christian and Western ones. Hundreds of years after the return of the area to Christian control, clearly Islamic minaret-type towers still stand, now enclosed by more typical Gothic-style buildings. Rounded, horseshoe-type arches with clean lines are proper alongside more recent peaked, ornamented arches in the Gothic style, and other areas show the influence of the Renaissance. Our guide Carmen repeatedly emphasized the succession of new leaders from one culture to the next. Then the next would deliberately retain details from the previous culture to showcase their power in the present, flexing on the last guy. Maybe loveliest of all in the palace were the enclosed gardens, which seemed to make the air different as we looked down from the gallery, a balcony or corridor built up into the original Muslim era defensive wall enclosing the gardens. For me, it's among the best examples of something beautiful that could not have existed without the influence of all the cultures that made it up. The downside of the visit was the unseasonable arrival of rain, which came and went, each time building in intensity. We ran through showers to the nearby Cathedral of Seville. This was another textbook case of a hybrid, beginning with a very obvious minaret from which Islamic clerics would have chanted the calls to prayer throughout the day, more recently capped in the Christian early with a belfry and crosses. This is also the site of the official tomb of Christopher Columbus, and while recent DNA tests on those remains confirm it's him, the inside scoop is that the whole thing contains only about 25 grams of the man. For context, we'll use more than 30 grams of coffee beans to make a pot of coffee. We left the cathedral in the worst rain, sending the boys scattering for cover and for a bite of lunch. Some of us stood under an overhang and a diverse group of other tourists, hoping things would settle down. But it just got worse and worse before it got better, with lots of lightning and thunder. Walking through the rain to the hotel to dry out, we boarded the bus for the Church of Magdalena, where once again we received another warm welcome from our host and a comfortable place to sit down and leave our gear. These small mercies make all of the difference in a trip like this. We had a thorough rehearsal in the space where we were to perform later, enough so that for the first time the choir master took a shot and one of the more challenging pieces in the choir repertoire, the Anton Biebel setting of Ave Maria, written for an all-male German choir of firefighters, almost as a duet between the choir and a solo trio. Off to a nearby restaurant for dinner, while the food was excellent the entire trip, this meal was notably underwhelming, which I don't offer as a gripe, but the exception which proves the rule. Then we went back to the venue for a 9 p.m. performance, which is a typical start time in a climate that's just when the heat of the day starts to ease. The performance went splendidly, with the one mild hiccup that the third voice in the trio couldn't make it to the stage. He's also one of our organ scholars. Once again, the organ is flights of stairs up and at the opposite end of the room, just too far away for him to get to us and back to the loft again. Fortunately, the harmony of the piece is very thick, so that the casual observer who would not have felt the lack of that one vocal line. With the lateness of this performance, we retired straight to the hotel and ended that day. The next day, our sixth day, our guide Danny calls days like this a cultural day, meaning that there's no performance. And we got to soak up one of the more remarkable sights in a region that's chock full of them. Today, we bust out to Cordoba, where the many cultures contributing to its development are evident and distinct. Starting with the bridge across the river to the arched entrance of the town, which couldn't be more obviously Roman. The Romans had been inhabiting the site for around since 200 years before the time of Christ. Then the main event was the Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba. After the Romans, barbarian Visigoths built here, followed by Muslims who made Cordoba the capital of their caliphate of Al-Andalus, and built a grand mosque, a vast indoor space supported by a forest of pillars that could accommodate in its prime tens of thousands of worshippers. When Christians took the city, they made the mosque their cathedral, and in the 16th century, they went further and built a classic Gothic-styled cathedral structure, more or less in the center of the mosque. So, you have to picture walking through acres of pillars and classic rounded arches in alternating red and brick, with entirely subdued lighting, only to stumble into a very typical, albeit majestic, European church, with windows high above flooding the space with Andalusian light. Before leaving the building, we stopped at a brightly lit spot for a company photo and dispersed into the ancient town for lunch. Gathering again before departing in an open square shaded by a grove of trees, it struck us that these were lime trees with fruit busily ripening. So we stopped again for another team photo. Then we returned to the bus to Seville for the evening. One of the things that struck me about the Mosque Cathedral in Cordoba was a memorial erected after the, the Spanish Civil War, which ran from 1936 to 1939. And this memorial commemorates the priests who had been executed by the Republicans during the war. And their names are listed there in a rather grand memorial within that cathedral building. We stopped at several of the chapels where services or tours were taking place before going outside into the sunlight. We we performed in a number of locations, and I'm just going to jump to our final location, which is in the Cathedral of Lisbon. The boys were tired. A number of them were sick by then, but they rose to the challenge, and they sang and they played well. This sarcophagus is in one of the chapels of the Lisbon Cathedral. And you may remember from the earlier slides, I have my dog Henry. And so this one attracted me because you can see the dog who's lying on the feet of the man who's buried there. I was not able to read the inscription that's on the wall behind him, but I was able to appreciate that he was sleeping forever with a dog um, at, at his feet, because that's what dogs do. In one of the slides, you'll see a young man at the organ with another two standing behind him. The student playing the organ is our current organ scholar at Royal St. George's College, and he has been accepted as an organ scholar at Oxford University next year. And the student behind him, Luca Morgante, was the organ scholar at St. George's, and then he went to Oxford and he was the organ scholar at Somerville College, Oxford. These are very, very talented students, and we were lucky to have them on this trip. The final few slides show the choir in the performance in the Lisbon Cathedral, and it capped off a very good end to what was a great trip to Portugal.